In the year 1846, a war broke out between the United States and Mexico. They called it the Mexican War. The fighting went on for 2 years, and when it was over, Mexico was forced to hand over more than 500,000 square miles of its territory, nearly half the country, to the United States. This land included all of what are now the states of California, Utah, and Nevada, and large parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming as well. By greatly increasing the size of the United States, the Mexican War opened up a whole new region to slavery, and the issue of slavery so divided the nation that it led directly to war between the states. In order to understand what caused the conflict between the United States and Mexico, it is important to understand how the land of North America changed hands during the early years of the American Republic. By the time the 13 colonies declared their independence from Great Britain in 1776, Spain controlled almost all the land west of the Mississippi River. However, as a result of the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War, the U.S. gained a vast amount of land that had never been part of the original 13 colonies. This brought the edge of the United States right up to the lands controlled by Spain. National borders changed quickly back then, and in 1800, Spain transferred a large part of its North American territory to France, and 3 years later, France sold it to the United States. This famous real estate transaction was called the Louisiana Purchase. As we have just seen, in the 27 years from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to the Louisiana Purchase, the size of the United States had increased immensely so that it extended far beyond the Mississippi River. At the same time, Spanish territory was shrinking, and most Americans liked it that way. They wanted the United States to keep on growing westward until it reached the Pacific Ocean. As the 19th century wore on, Spain became more and more preoccupied with problems in Europe, and it seemed to lose interest in North America. As a result, several of its colonies began to seek independence. In the year 1821, Spain approved a treaty that gave control of Florida and the southern parts of what are now the states of Alabama and Mississippi to the United States. But 1821 was important for another reason, because it was the year Mexico obtained its independence from Spain. After that time, Mexican flags began to fly over towns such as Santa Fe, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Antonio. From the earliest days of its independence, Mexico had allowed Americans to settle in the region they called Texas. And that is why it is in Texas we find the roots of the Mexican War. Back in the 1820s, Americans were attracted to the area because of its inexpensive land prices. In fact, so many Americans came, they soon outnumbered the Texans of Mexican descent. Many Texans wanted to use slaves on their big farms, and problems started to develop in 1829 when Mexico outlawed slavery. Then, the Mexican government closed Texas to further American settlement. As a result, Texans declared their independence from Mexico. In 1836, after 2 years of revolution, Texas became an independent nation. But Texans really didn't want independence. They wanted to join the United States, a plan that Mexico was dead set against. There was also great opposition to Texas from northern free states who didn't want a new slave state in the Union. Nevertheless, in 1845, Congress voted in favor of Texas statehood, and when this happened, Mexico cut off its relations with the United States. In the 1840s, the people of the United States had come to believe that it was their nation's manifest destiny to keep growing westward, spreading what they saw as the blessings of liberty and democracy across the land. In fact, some Americans even wanted the United States to take over Mexico and Canada. The same year Texas became a state, 1845, U.S. President James K. Polk tried to make a deal to buy the northern half of Mexico, some of which had been inhabited by Spanish-speaking people for well over 200 years. For the province of New Mexico, the U.S. offered $5 million, and for the province of Alta California, $25 million. The government of Mexico was so offended they refused to even discuss the offer. To punish Mexico for its refusal, the United States decided to start a war and force them to sell the land. This was quite easy to do, since the new state of Texas was claiming the Rio Grande as its western boundary, while Mexico claimed the border was where it always had been, much further east at the Nueces River. As a result, a very large area of land was in dispute. To provoke a war, U.S. troops were sent into the disputed area, and, as they expected, they were attacked by Mexican forces for doing so. As soon as this happened, the United States claimed its territory had been invaded. And so, on May 13, 1846, the U.S. declared war on Mexico. In June of 1846, on hearing war had been declared, American settlers living in the Sacramento Valley of California declared their independence from Mexico and raised the flag of the California Republic in the capital of Sonoma. This rebellion, known as the Bear Flag Revolt, was instigated in part by Captain John C. Fremont and a band of soldiers who had been secretly working under orders from the U.S. government even before the declaration of war. Shortly after the revolt began, the important port city of Monterey was captured by a small U.S. invasion force that had been brought in on ships commanded by Commodore John Sloat. At the same time U.S. forces began to occupy Monterey, troops under General Stephen Kearny were dispatched from Fort Leavenworth in Kansas with orders to take New Mexico and then invade California. Kearny's troops headed west along the Santa Fe Trail, the road that had served as a vital trade route between the United States and Mexico from the early days of Mexican independence. About halfway to Santa Fe, the troops reached the frontier trading post called Bent's Fort, located in present-day Colorado. This fort lay just across the Arkansas River from the disputed territory that had led to America's declaration of war on Mexico. It was near Bent's Fort that Kearny's forces crossed the river and from there went on to take Santa Fe without bloodshed. But even though the invasion brought American rule to New Mexico, there was still much more military work that General Kearny had been ordered to do. After their success at Santa Fe, Kearny and his men, with the famous frontier scout Kit Carson as their guide, headed off across 1,000 miles of desert to invade California from the east. As Kearny's forces moved steadily westward, a large army commanded by future U.S. President Zachary Taylor marched south from the Texas town of Corpus Christi to mount an attack on another Mexican city called Monterrey. In the extremely bloody battle that followed, many hundreds of soldiers were killed, but eventually Taylor was able to capture the city and the great fortress that protected it. A few months later, in December of 1846, General Kearny's army had finally reached California. As they crossed over some high hills down into the valley of San Pascual near San Diego, they encountered Mexican soldiers. In the ensuing battle, Kearny was badly wounded and some of his men were killed. However, most of them survived and went on to join forces with other U.S. troops, led by Commodore Robert Stockton. Together, Kearny and Stockton's troops were able to defeat a powerful Mexican force in the Battle of San Gabriel near Los Angeles. And with that victory, in January of 1847, the United States took possession of California. With American forces in control of northern Mexico, the United States shifted its attention south toward the population center of the country. America planned a major attack on the region with the goal of forcing the Mexican government into accepting the permanent loss of its northern territory. In the early spring of 1847, ships were prepared to transport an invasion force led by General Winfield Scott from New Orleans to the large port of Veracruz on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. When they reached Veracruz, Scott's ships were greeted with cannon fire. The ships responded quickly and began to bombard the fortifications. The fighting went on for days, and much of Veracruz was destroyed as a result. But eventually, on March 29, 1847, the city surrendered to the Americans. Then, marching inland from the coast, U.S. troops began to make their way toward Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. In April, among these rugged hills west of Veracruz, the terrible Battle of Cerro Gordo was fought when Scott's forces encountered the army led by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, a famous general and sometimes the President of Mexico. After U.S. troops won this battle, President Polk offered to give Santa Anna $1 million if he would sign a peace treaty, but Santa Anna refused. So U.S. forces had to continue along the road to the capital. And in September of 1847, 30,000 U.S. and Mexican troops battled fiercely for control of the city. The United States won the battle, and that gave the victorious General Scott an opportunity to parade his troops around Mexico's great national cathedral in the very heart of the capital city. It was on February 2nd, 1848, that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, formally ending the Mexican War. In it, Mexico agreed to accept the Rio Grande as its new border with Texas and to sell its northern territory for only half of what the U.S. had offered for it before the war began. In all, about 25,000 Mexican and 12,700 American soldiers died as a result of the Mexican War. These deaths occurred so that America could fulfill its manifest destiny and become a two-ocean country. And although California entered the Union as a free state in 1850, the rest of the land the United States gained from the Mexican War was opened up to slavery until this practice was finally outlawed at the end of America's Civil War. True or false? The Bear Flag Revolt was a revolution in Texas. True or false? The land that makes up today's state of Arizona was once a possession of Spain. True or false? The worst battle of the Mexican War was fought in today's state of New Mexico. True or false? In the 1840s, the concept of manifest destiny strongly influenced American politics. True or false? Stephen Kearny was the U.S. President during the Mexican War.